Sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't hidden in dark alleys or criminal underworlds. Sometimes they're sitting right across from you at the breakfast table, smiling and asking if you need more coffee. Sarah Chun thought she knew everything about her husband of 8 years. She thought she understood why he worked late, why he was always checking his phone, and why he sometimes disappeared for hours without explanation. She believed his stories about business meetings and client dinners. But when a single photograph landed on her desk at the prestigious law firm where she worked as a senior paralegal for billionaire tech mogul Marcus Ashford, everything she thought she knew crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. The photograph showed her husband David in a hotel room, but he wasn't alone, and he wasn't conducting business. What made her blood run cold wasn't just the betrayal. It was what she recognized in the background of that hotel room. Documents, contracts, her boss's most confidential files spread across the bed like some twisted game of corporate espionage. In that moment, Sarah faced an impossible choice that would test every moral fiber of her being. Her husband wasn't just cheating on her. He was selling her boss's billion-dollar secrets to the competition. The man she loved, the father of her 2 young children, was a corporate spy who had been using her position to destroy the company that had given her everything. The evidence was undeniable, the consequences catastrophic, and the decision she would make in the next 24 hours would change the course of multiple lives forever. Some betrayals cut so deep they reach your soul. But when that betrayal threatens to destroy an innocent man who trusted you with his empire, protecting him might mean sacrificing everything you've ever held dear. This is the story of a woman who discovered that sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go, even if it destroys you in the process. Sarah Chun had always believed that success was built on trust, hard work, and a little bit of luck. As she sat in her pristine office on the 42nd floor of Ashford Industries, looking out at the sprawling city below, she felt grateful for how far she had come. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across her mahogany desk, where she meticulously organized Marcus Ashford's schedule for the day. At 34, she had achieved something most people only dreamed of. She was the right hand of one of the most powerful men in the technology industry. Marcus Ashford wasn't just any billionaire. He was the kind of man who remembered the names of every employee's children, who had built his company from garage startup into a global empire worth over $50 billion, and who treated Sarah not just as an employee, but as a trusted confidant. For the past 6 years, she had managed his most sensitive business dealings, coordinated meetings with world leaders, and handled information that could make or break entire industries. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the trust he placed in her, and Sarah had never once betrayed that confidence. Her personal life seemed equally blessed. She had married David Chun when she was 26, fresh out of paralegal school, and full of dreams about building a perfect life together. David worked in corporate consulting, helping companies streamline their operations and improve efficiency. He was handsome in that understated way that made other women take a second look, tall, with kind brown eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. More importantly, he was a devoted father to their 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Jake, and he seemed to genuinely love the quiet suburban life they had built together. Their marriage had its challenges, like any other. David worked long hours, often traveling to meet with clients in other cities. Sometimes he would be gone for days at a time, returning home exhausted, but always with presents for the children and flowers for Sarah. She never questioned these trips because she understood the demands of his work. After all, she spent plenty of her own time managing Marcus's complex schedule, often working late into the evening to ensure everything ran smoothly. The Chin family lived in a beautiful colonial house in an upscale suburb, the kind of neighborhood where children rode their bikes safely on tree-lined streets, and neighbors knew each other by name. Sarah's salary from Ashford Industries was generous enough that David could be selective about his consulting contracts, choosing only the most lucrative opportunities. They had savings, college funds for the children, and even a small vacation home by the lake where they spent summer weekends teaching Emma and Jake how to fish and swim. On the surface, everything was perfect. But, as Sarah would soon learn, surfaces can be deceiving, and the foundations of even the strongest-looking lives can crumble without warning. The first crack in her perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning in early October. Sarah was reviewing quarterly reports in her office when her assistant, Kelly, knocked on the door with an expression of confusion mixed with concern. Kelly was normally unflappable. She had worked for high-powered executives for over a decade and had seen everything the corporate world could throw at her. But today, she looked genuinely puzzled. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you," Kelly said quietly, glancing over her shoulder toward the reception area. "She says it's personal, but she won't give me her name. She's been waiting for 20 minutes and seems really nervous." Sarah frowned, setting down the financial documents she had been studying. Personal visitors were extremely rare at the office, especially ones who wouldn't identify themselves. Her first thought was that something might have happened to one of the children, but surely the school would have called her directly. Her second thought was that this might be some kind of corporate espionage attempt. In Marcus's world, competitors were always looking for ways to gain an advantage, and approaching his trusted employees was not unheard of. "What does she look like?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her phone to check for missed calls from David or the children's school. "Young, maybe mid-20s. Blonde hair, expensive clothes, but she looks scared." "Really scared," Kelly replied, lowering her voice. "She keeps checking her phone and looking around like she's afraid someone followed her." The description didn't match anyone Sarah knew. She considered having security escort the woman out, but something about Kelly's description of the visitor's fear made her pause. If someone was genuinely in trouble and had come specifically to see her, perhaps she should at least find out what they wanted. "Give me 5 minutes to finish this section, then bring her in," Sarah decided. "But stay close to your desk in case I need you to call security." Kelly nodded and left to retrieve the mysterious visitor. Sarah quickly saved her work and cleared her desk of any sensitive documents, following the security protocols that had been drilled into every Ashford Industries employee. Whatever this woman wanted, Sarah wasn't taking any chances with confidential information. When Kelly returned, she was accompanied by a young woman who was indeed strikingly beautiful, but looked absolutely terrified. She had the kind of polished appearance that suggested money and education, designer handbag, perfectly styled hair, expensive jewelry, but her hands were shaking and her eyes darted nervously around the office as if she expected someone to jump out from behind the furniture. "Please sit down," Sarah said gently, gesturing to the comfortable chairs arranged around a small conference table near the window. She chose these seats instead of sitting behind her imposing desk, hoping to put the woman at ease. "I'm Sarah Chen. My assistant said you wanted to speak with me about something personal." The woman perched on the edge of her chair as if ready to flee at any moment. She clutched her purse in her lap and took several deep breaths before speaking. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper. "My name is Lisa Morrison," she began, then stopped and shook her head. "Actually, that's not true. I can't tell you my real name because I'm afraid of what might happen if certain people find out I came here. But I had to come. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't warn you." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This conversation was already heading in a direction that made her deeply uncomfortable. "Warn me about what?" Lisa reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a manila envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly that she almost dropped it twice before managing to place it on the table between them. "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to show you. But please, before you open that envelope, you need to understand that I didn't want to be involved in any of this. I never meant for things to go this far. I think maybe you should start from the beginning," Sarah said carefully. Her instincts told her that whatever was in that envelope was going to change everything, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of disruption in her carefully ordered life. Lisa nodded and took another shaky breath. "I work for Meridian Strategic Solutions. It's a consulting firm that specializes in competitive intelligence. Most of what we do is perfectly legal, analyzing public records, studying market trends, that sort of thing. But Sometimes clients ask for information that goes beyond what's publicly available. Sarah's blood began to run cold. Meridian Strategic Solutions was one of Ashford Industries' primary competitors in the tech consulting space. If they were engaged in corporate espionage, that was a serious threat to Marcus's business interests. About 6 months ago, Lisa continued, we got a contract from a client who wanted detailed information about Marcus Ashford's upcoming product launches and strategic partnerships. The kind of information that isn't available through normal channels. My boss assigned me to the project, but he told me I wouldn't be working alone. He said we had an inside source who could provide the intelligence we needed. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle were beginning to form in Sarah's mind, but she refused to let herself jump to conclusions. There had to be some other explanation. An inside source? Someone with access to Ashford's most confidential documents. Someone who could photograph contracts, meeting notes, strategic plans. Everything our client needed to stay one step ahead of Ashford Industries. Lisa's voice grew even quieter. Someone who had been feeding us information for over 2 years. Sarah's mouth went dry. Ooh. Instead of answering directly, Lisa pushed the envelope across the table. I took these photographs 3 weeks ago at a hotel in downtown Chicago. Our source was supposed to meet me there to hand over documents related to Ashford's plans for expanding into the European market. But when I got to the room, I found him in a compromising position with someone who wasn't his wife. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of glossy photographs. The first few images showed a hotel room door, then the hallway, clearly establishing the location and timestamp. But when she flipped to the 4th photograph, her entire world came crashing down around her. There was David, her beloved husband of 8 years, locked in an intimate embrace with a woman Sarah had never seen before. They were on a hotel bed, and spread around them like some obscene confetti were dozens of documents that Sarah immediately recognized as some of Marcus Ashford's most sensitive business plans. Contracts worth millions of dollars, strategic partnerships that hadn't been announced yet, product development timelines that competitors would pay fortunes to obtain. Sarah stared at the photographs for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Her brain kept trying to process what she was seeing, to find some innocent explanation for why her husband was in a hotel room with another woman surrounded by her boss's confidential documents. But there was no innocent explanation. David wasn't just cheating on her. He was a corporate spy who had been using her position at Ashford Industries to betray the man who trusted her with his empire. "I am sorry," Lisa whispered. "I know this must be devastating for you. But you need to know that the woman in those photographs isn't just some random affair. Her name is Amanda Pierce, and she works for the same client who hired us to get information about Ashford Industries. Your husband has been selling your boss's secrets for over 2 years." Sarah set the photographs down on the table with hands that had gone completely numb. She looked up at Lisa, trying to understand why this stranger had risked her career and possibly her safety to bring her this information. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Why not just continue using the intelligence David was providing?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "Because I did some research on you after I realized who David was married to. I found out that you're not just some random employee. You're Marcus Ashford's most trusted aide. You've been with his company for 6 years, and from everything I could find, you're completely innocent in all of this. You have 2 young children, and you've built a life based on what you thought was trust and honesty. That still doesn't explain why you're here," Sarah said, though she was beginning to understand. "Because our client isn't satisfied with just getting inside information anymore," Lisa replied, her voice barely audible. "They want to take down Ashford Industries completely. They've been using the intelligence David provided to undercut Ashford's deals, steal his clients, and sabotage his partnerships. But now they want something bigger. They want David to plant false information that would trigger a federal investigation into Ashford's business practices. They want to destroy him completely, and they're going to use your husband to do it." Sarah felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. Not only was David betraying her and their marriage, but he was about to participate in a scheme that would destroy Marcus Ashford, a man who had been nothing but generous and trusting toward her and her family. Marcus had paid for Emma's surgery when she broke her arm badly enough to require specialized treatment. He had given Sarah bonuses that allowed them to buy their house and save for the children's education. He had treated her like family, and now her own husband was plotting his destruction. When is this supposed to happen? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she really wanted to know the answer. Soon, Lisa replied. David is supposed to meet with Amanda again next week to finalize the plan. After that, they'll put the false information in place, and within a month, Marcus Ashford's reputation and business will be destroyed. Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what she had learned. Her marriage was a lie. Her husband was a criminal, and the man who had trusted her with his most sensitive business information was about to be betrayed in the worst possible way. She had to make a choice, and there were no good options. She could confront David and try to convince him to stop, but that would alert him to the fact that his activities had been discovered, and he might simply disappear or accelerate his timeline. She could go directly to Marcus with the evidence, but that would mean admitting that her husband had been using her position to betray him for years. She could contact the authorities, but a federal investigation would take time, and David's final betrayal might happen before the law could intervene. Or she could protect Marcus Ashford the way he had always protected her, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had built with David and potentially destroying her children's lives in the process. As Sarah looked at the photographs spread across the table, she realized that her perfect life had been an illusion. But the choice she made in the next few days would determine whether she could salvage anything real from the wreckage, and whether she could live with herself regardless of what she decided to do. Sarah drove home that evening in a haze of disbelief and growing anger. The photographs were secured in her briefcase, locked away like toxic waste that could contaminate everything it touched. Every traffic light gave her more time to think, and thinking was the last thing she wanted to do. The familiar route through her neighborhood, past the coffee shop where she and David had their first date, past the park where they had taught Emma to ride her bike, felt like a journey through a graveyard of memories that could never be trusted again. When she pulled in her driveway, she sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the warm light glowing through the living room windows. Inside that house were her children, innocently doing homework and waiting for dinner, completely unaware that their father was living a double life that was about to destroy their family. David's car was in the garage, which meant he was home early for once. Under normal circumstances, she would have been pleased. Tonight, the sight of his silver sedan made her stomach churn. Sarah forced herself to walk through the front door with a smile on her face. Emma and Jake came running to greet her, as they did every evening, their faces bright with excitement about sharing the details of their school day. Emma had gotten an A on her science project about the solar system, and Jake had scored 2 goals during recess soccer. They chattered happily as Sarah hung up her coat and set down her briefcase, and for a moment, she almost forgot about the nightmare that her life had become. David emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron and carrying a wooden spoon. He looked so domestic, so perfectly normal, that Sarah had to grip the banister to steady herself. This was the same man who had kissed her goodbye that morning, who had asked if she needed him to pick up anything from the grocery store, who had reminded her about Jake's parent-teacher conference next week. How was it possible that someone could live such a complete lie? Perfect timing, David said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. I made that pasta dish you love, the one with the sun-dried tomatoes and basil. The kids have already eaten, but I kept yours warm. Sarah accepted his kiss and managed to smile, though it felt like her face might crack from the effort. That sounds wonderful. Let me just change clothes and wash my hands. As she climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Sarah caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. She looked exactly the same as she had that morning, professional, composed, tired but content. There was no outward sign that her entire world had been turned upside down in the space of a single conversation. She wondered if David was equally skilled at hiding his true self, or she had simply been too trusting to see the signs that must have been there all along. In their bedroom, surrounded by the familiar comforts of their shared life, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had learned. The wedding photo on David's nightstand showed them both looking radiant with hope and love. The family portraits on the dresser captured moments of genuine happiness. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, birthday parties. Had any of it been real for him, or had she been living with a stranger who was skilled enough to fake emotions for 8 years? She changed into casual clothes and splashed cold water on her face, trying to compose herself for the performance she would have to give through dinner. She had to act normal, at least until she figured out what to do with the information Lisa had given her. The children couldn't suspect that anything was wrong, and David couldn't know that his activities had been discovered. Not yet. Dinner was a special kind of torture. David was in an exceptionally good mood, entertaining the children with funny stories about his day and asking detailed questions about their activities. He helped Jake with his math homework and listened patiently while Emma practiced her lines for the school play. He was being the perfect father and husband, exactly as he had been for years. But now Sarah could see it for what it really was, another layer of deception. "How was your day, sweetheart?" David asked as they cleaned up the dishes together after the children had gone upstairs to get ready for bed. "You seem a little quiet tonight." Sarah concentrated on loading the dishwasher, afraid to look directly at him. "Just tired. We had a busy day at the office. Marcus is considering a major acquisition, so there's a lot of due diligence work to coordinate." She watched David's reaction carefully. For just a moment, his expression sharpened with interest, but then he quickly returned to his casual demeanor. "That sounds stressful. Anything I can help you with? You know, I have experience with corporate acquisitions." The offer made Sarah's blood run cold. Of course, David would want to know about Marcus's acquisition plans. That kind of information would be incredibly valuable to Meridian Strategic Solutions and their clients. She wondered how many times over the years David had pumped her for information during innocent-seeming conversations like this one. "Thanks, but it's all confidential," Sarah replied, testing him. "You know how careful Marcus is about keeping sensitive information secure." David nodded understandingly. "Of course. I wouldn't want you to violate any confidentiality agreements. I'm just saying that if you ever need someone to talk through the stress, I'm here for you." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that Sarah might have missed it if she hadn't known what to look for. David wasn't offering emotional support. He was fishing for intelligence while positioning himself as the caring, supportive husband. How many times had he used their marriage bed as an interrogation room, gathering secrets while she slept trustingly beside him? After the children were asleep, Sarah and David settled into their usual evening routine. They sat together on the couch, ostensibly watching television, but Sarah found herself studying her husband's profile in the flickering light of the screen. He looked so normal, so familiar. She knew every line of his face, every expression he made when he was concentrating or amused or tired. But now she wondered if she really knew him at all. "David," she said carefully, "do you ever think about what would happen if one of us lost our job?" He turned to look at her with mild surprise. "That's a strange question. Why? Are you worried about something at Ashford Industries?" "Not worried, exactly. Just thinking about how much our lives depend on our careers. If something happened to Marcus's business, I would lose not just my job, but everything I've built there over the past 6 years." David reached over and took her hand. "Hey, don't worry about that. Marcus Ashford is one of the most successful businessmen in the world. His company isn't going anywhere." The reassurance might have been comforting if Sarah didn't know that David was actively working to destroy everything Marcus had built. She squeezed his hand, wondering if this would be one of the last times she would ever trust his touch. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm probably just overthinking things." They went to bed at their usual time, following the same routine they had maintained for years. David brushed his teeth, Sarah applied her nighttime skincare routine, and they both changed into comfortable sleepwear. But when David reached for her in the darkness, Sarah felt herself stiffen involuntarily. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his breath warm against her neck. Just tired, she replied, turning away from him. It really was a long day. David accepted her rejection without complaint, as he always did when she wasn't in the mood for intimacy. But as he settled into sleep beside her, Sarah stared at the ceiling and wondered how many other women he had held in hotel rooms while surrounded by her boss's stolen secrets. Sleep, when it finally came, brought no peace. Sarah's dreams were filled with images from the photographs Lisa had shown her. She saw David's face, but instead of the loving expression she was used to, he wore the calculating look of a stranger. She dreamed of Marcus Ashford's kind eyes filling with betrayal and disappointment when he learned how thoroughly he had been deceived. She dreamed of Emma and Jake crying as their perfect suburban world crumbled around them. When Sarah woke the next morning, David was already gone. A note on his pillow said that he had an early meeting with a client in the next city and would be home late. Under normal circumstances, Sarah wouldn't have given the note a second thought. Today, she wondered if he was actually meeting with Amanda Pierce to plan the final phase of Marcus Ashford's destruction. At the office, Sarah found herself jumping every time her phone rang, afraid that it might be news about some crisis at the company. She reviewed every document twice, looking for any sign that confidential information had been compromised. She studied Marcus's schedule, wondering which meetings David might have known about in advance and whether that intelligence had been used against them. Marcus himself seemed completely normal. He arrived at his usual time, greeted Sarah with his customary warmth, and dove into his work with the focused intensity that had made him one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his generation. He trusted her completely, just as he always had, and that trust felt like a weight that might crush her. Around mid-morning, Kelly knocked on Sarah's office door. "Sarah, that woman from yesterday is on the phone. Lisa Morrison? She says it's urgent." Sarah felt her pulse accelerate. She had given Lisa her direct number in case there were any developments in the situation, but she had hoped not to hear from her again so soon. "Put her through," Sarah said, closing her office door and activating the privacy mode that would prevent anyone from overhearing her conversation. Lisa's voice was tight with panic when the call connected. "Sarah, something's changed. The timeline has been moved up. David is supposed to meet with Amanda tonight, not next week." "Tonight?" Sarah's heart began to race. "Are you sure? My boss just called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. He said our client is getting impatient and wants to move forward immediately. David is supposed to plant the false documents in Marcus Ashford's files tonight, and tomorrow morning, our client will make an anonymous tip to federal investigators." Sarah gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. "That's impossible. David doesn't have access to Marcus's files. They're all secured with biometric locks and advanced encryption." There was a long pause before Lisa responded. "Sarah, how does David have such detailed knowledge of Ashford's business operations? How has he been able to provide photographs of confidential documents for over 2 years?" The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. David didn't need to break into Marcus's files because he had something even better: access to someone who could open those files for him. Someone who trusted him completely and had never questioned his casual inquiries about her work. Someone who had unknowingly been helping him betray her boss for years. "Oh God," Sarah whispered. "He's been using me." "I'm sorry," Lisa said gently. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but you need to understand how serious this is. If David plants false evidence tonight, Marcus Ashford will be arrested tomorrow morning. The scandal will destroy his company, bankrupt thousands of employees, and ruin an innocent man's reputation forever." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think clearly through the panic that was threatening to overwhelm her. What kind of false evidence? Documents that make it look like Ashford has been engaged in insider trading, bribery of foreign officials, and tax evasion. The kind of charges that would result in criminal prosecution and the complete destruction of his business empire. But surely an investigation would reveal that the documents are fake? Eventually, maybe, but by then, the damage would be done. Ashford's stock would crash, his business partners would flee, and his reputation would be destroyed. Even if he was eventually cleared of all charges, he would never recover from the initial scandal. Sarah felt sick. Marcus Ashford was not just her boss, but a genuinely good man who had built his fortune through innovation, hard work, and ethical business practices. He employed thousands of people, supported numerous charitable causes, and had always treated his employees with respect and generosity. The idea that he could be destroyed by false accusations planted by her own husband was almost too horrible to contemplate. "What can I do?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would require her to make an impossible choice. "You have to stop him," Lisa said simply. "You're the only one who can. David trusts you, and you have access to all of Ashford's files. You can prevent him from planting the false evidence, and you can warn Ashford about what's coming. If I do that, David will go to prison. My children will lose their father, and I'll lose everything I've built with him over the past 8 years. If you don't do it, an innocent man will be destroyed, thousands of people will lose their jobs, and you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you could have prevented it." Sarah sat in silence, staring out at the city skyline that had seemed so welcoming just 24 hours earlier. The choice before her was stark and unforgiving. She could protect her family and allow Marcus Ashford to be destroyed, or she could save Marcus and sacrifice everything she had built with David. But as she thought about the man who had trusted her with his most sensitive business information, who had treated her like family for 6 years, who had never given her any reason to doubt his integrity or kindness, she realized that the choice wasn't really a choice at all. She knew what she had to do, even if it destroyed her in the process. Sarah spent the rest of Wednesday in a state of controlled panic, going through the motions of her daily responsibilities while her mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios. Every time Marcus spoke to her, every casual conversation about upcoming meetings or business decisions, she wondered if she was unknowingly providing David with information that would be used against the company. The weight of her unwitting complicity in the betrayal made it difficult to breathe. She had made her decision during that phone call with Lisa, but implementing it would require careful planning and nerves of steel. If she confronted David directly, he might simply deny everything or, worse, disappear before she could stop him from planting the false evidence. If she went to Marcus without proof, she would have to explain how her husband had been stealing confidential information for years, potentially implicating herself in the conspiracy. The photographs Lisa had given her proved David's relationship with Amanda Pierce, but they didn't definitively prove his guilt in the corporate espionage scheme. What Sarah needed was irrefutable evidence of David's betrayal, captured in a way that would protect both Marcus Ashford and her own reputation. She needed to catch him in the act while ensuring that the false documents never made it into Marcus's files. It was a delicate operation that would require split-second timing and a level of deception that went against every instinct she had developed over years of honest living. By late afternoon, Sarah had formulated a plan that was risky but potentially effective. She would use her access to Marcus's office and files to set a trap for David, creating a scenario where his betrayal would be captured on the building's sophisticated security system while preventing any real damage to the company. It would require her to deceive her husband, betray his trust in the same way he had betrayed hers, and potentially expose herself to criminal liability if anything went wrong. The first step was to ensure that Marcus would not be in the building that evening. She checked his calendar and discovered that he had a dinner meeting with potential investors that would likely keep him occupied until well after normal business hours. Perfect. She then reviewed the building's security protocols, confirming that all after-hours access was logged and recorded by multiple camera systems. Anyone entering the executive floors would be tracked from the moment they stepped off the elevator. At 5 o'clock, as most of the office staff began to leave for the day, Sarah called David's cell phone. He answered on the third ring, and she could hear traffic noise in the background suggesting that he was driving. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, forcing warmth into her voice. "I know you said you'd be home late tonight, but I was wondering if you might have time to stop by my office first. Marcus asked me to prepare some documents for tomorrow's board meeting, but they're quite complex and I could really use someone with your expertise to review them. There was a pause before David responded. What kind of documents? Acquisition contracts and financial projections for the European expansion. I know it's a lot to ask, but you've always been so good at spotting potential problems in these kinds of agreements. Sarah held her breath, hoping that the bait would be irresistible to someone who had been selling Marcus's secrets for years. Of course I'll help, David said, and Sarah could hear the excitement he was trying to hide. I should be able to get there around 8:30. Will security let me up to your floor? I'll make sure they have your name on the visitor list, Sarah replied. And David, thank you. This really means a lot to me. After ending the call, Sarah began to implement the rest of her plan. She contacted building security and arranged for David to be given access to the executive floors, making sure that his visit would be properly logged and recorded. She then spent an hour creating a set of dummy documents that looked authentic but contained no real confidential information. The fake contracts and financial projections were sophisticated enough to fool a casual observer, but would be immediately recognizable as forgeries by anyone with detailed knowledge of Marcus's actual business plans. The most difficult part of her preparation involved accessing Marcus's private files to understand exactly how they were organized and secured. Sarah had legitimate access to most of his documents as part of her job, but she had never paid attention to the specific security measures that protected the most sensitive information. She discovered that the files were organized in a complex hierarchy with multiple layers of encryption and access controls. Anyone attempting to plant false documents would need detailed knowledge of this system, the kind of knowledge that could only come from someone with intimate familiarity with Marcus's operations. As the evening wore on and the office building emptied of its normal occupants, Sarah felt increasingly isolated and nervous. She had sent the security staff a message explaining that she would be working late on urgent board meeting preparations, so her presence in the building after hours would not seem suspicious. But she was acutely aware that she was essentially setting up her own husband for arrest and prosecution, an action that would have consequences far beyond their marriage. At 8:15, Sarah received a text message from David saying that he was in the parking garage and would be up shortly. She quickly arranged the dummy documents on her desk, positioning them in a way that would be clearly visible to the security cameras while appearing casual and natural. She also activated a small digital recorder that she kept for taking notes during important meetings, hiding it among the papers where it would capture any conversation that took place in her office. When David stepped off the elevator and walked toward her office, Sarah was struck by how normal he looked. He was carrying his usual briefcase and wore the same charming smile that had attracted her to him years earlier. If she hadn't known what she knew, she would have been genuinely happy to see him and grateful for his willingness to help her with a difficult work assignment. "You're a lifesaver," Sarah said, rising to greet him with a kiss that felt like betrayal on multiple levels. "I've been staring at these documents for hours, and I'm starting to second-guess every decision." David set down his briefcase and examined the papers spread across Sarah's desk. His eyes moved quickly over the financial projections and contract terms, and Sarah could see his mind working as he processed the information. "These look pretty straightforward," he said after a few minutes. "Standard acquisition language, reasonable financial terms. What specifically are you concerned about?" "The European regulatory requirements," Sarah replied, pointing to a section of the fake documents. "Marcus is worried that we might be missing some crucial compliance issues that could derail the entire deal. He wants me to have everything perfect before tomorrow's presentation." David leaned closer to study the documents, and Sarah had to resist the urge to step away from him. Standing so close to her husband while knowing what he really was felt like being in the presence of a dangerous stranger. "I don't see any obvious problems," he said, "but these regulations can be tricky. Do you have access to the original due diligence files? Sometimes the devil is in the details that don't make it into the summary documents." There it was, the request Sarah had been expecting. David wasn't really interested in helping her with her work concerns. He wanted access to Marcus's most confidential files, the ones that would contain the real information about the European expansion plans. Information that would be incredibly valuable to Meridian Strategic Solutions and their clients. The original files are in Marcus's private server, Sarah said carefully. I have access, but I'm not supposed to download or copy anything without his explicit permission. I understand, David said, but if you're just reviewing the documents to make sure your summary is accurate, that shouldn't be a problem. You're not removing anything from the building or sharing it with unauthorized people. The manipulation was subtle but clear. David was encouraging her to access confidential files while providing her with a rationalization that would make her feel better about violating her employer's trust. Sarah wondered how many times he had used similar techniques to extract information from her over the years. You're right, Sarah said, moving toward her computer. Let me pull up the original due diligence files. But you'll have to promise not to mention this to anyone. Marcus is very strict about information security. Of course, David replied. This stays between us. Sarah logged into Marcus's private server, her hands trembling slightly as she navigated through the file structure. She was acutely aware that every keystroke was being recorded by the security system, creating an electronic trail that would document exactly what information had been accessed and when. She pulled up a folder labeled European Expansion, Confidential, and opened several documents that appeared to contain sensitive business information. Here we go, she said, stepping aside so David could see the computer screen. These are the original contracts and regulatory analyses. David moved closer to the computer, his eyes scanning the documents with intense concentration. Sarah watched his face, looking for any sign that he recognized the information as fake or suspected that he was being manipulated. But he seemed completely focused on absorbing every detail, occasionally asking her to scroll to different sections or zoom in on particular clauses. After 20 minutes of reviewing the fake documents, David straightened up with a satisfied expression. I think you're overthinking this, he said. The regulatory compliance looks solid, and the financial terms are quite favorable. Marcus should be pleased with how this acquisition is structured. Thank you, Sarah said, saving the documents and logging out of the server. I feel much better about tomorrow's presentation now. You always know how to put my mind at ease. David gathered his things and prepared to leave, but then he paused and turned back to Sarah. You know, if you ever need help with this kind of analysis in the future, I'd be happy to consult on it. Informally, of course, and always maintaining complete confidentiality. It's the kind of work I really enjoy, and I hate to see you stressed about something that's well within your capabilities. The offer was delivered with perfect sincerity, but Sarah could see it for what it really was, an attempt to formalize his access to Marcus's confidential information. Instead of stealing documents sporadically through casual conversations, David wanted to establish himself as Sarah's unofficial consultant, giving him regular and systematic access to the company's most sensitive business plans. That's very generous of you, Sarah replied. I'll definitely keep that in mind for future projects. After David left, Sarah sat alone in her office for several minutes, trying to process what had just occurred. Her husband had walked into her workplace, reviewed confidential documents without authorization, and attempted to establish ongoing access to sensitive information. He had done it all while maintaining the facade of being a loving, supportive spouse who simply wanted to help his wife succeed in her career. But Sarah's plan was only half complete. She had documented David's unauthorized access to confidential information, but she had not yet prevented him from planting false evidence in Marcus's files. According to Lisa Morrison, that was supposed to happen later that evening, after David had surveyed the security situation and identified the best opportunity to introduce forged documents. Sarah spent the next hour reviewing the security camera footage from her computer, watching David's movements through the building, and confirming that every moment of his visit had been recorded. She then prepared a comprehensive report documenting his unauthorized access to confidential information, complete with timestamps and screen captures showing exactly which files he had viewed. At 10:30, her phone rang. The caller ID showed David's number, but when Sarah answered, she heard a voice she didn't recognize, a woman speaking in urgent, whispered tones. "Sarah, this is Lisa Morrison. I'm calling from David's phone because I needed you to hear this. David just arrived at the hotel where he's supposed to meet with Amanda Pierce. But something's gone wrong. Amanda isn't here, and David is acting very suspicious. I think he knows that his activities have been discovered." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" He keeps checking his phone and looking around like he's expecting to be arrested. And he's carrying a briefcase that he didn't have when he left her office. I think he went somewhere else first and picked up the false documents he's supposed to plant. Where is he now? He's in the hotel lobby, but he's not staying. He just got back in his car, and I think he's heading back to your office building. Sarah, if he plants those false documents tonight, Marcus Ashford will be arrested first thing tomorrow morning. You have to stop him." Sarah was already grabbing her keys and heading for the elevator. "How long do I have?" 20 minutes, maybe 30 if traffic is bad. "But, Sarah, be careful. If David realizes that you know what he's been doing, there's no telling how he might react. He's been living a double life for years, and people like that can be dangerous when they're cornered." As the elevator carried Sarah down to the parking garage, she realized that the careful trap she had set earlier that evening had been just the first act of a much more dangerous drama. Now she would have to confront her husband directly, with no backup plan and no guarantee that she could prevent him from destroying Marcus Ashford's reputation and business empire. The next 30 minutes would determine not only the fate of one of the most successful businessmen in the world, but also the future of her own family and the lives of her innocent children. Sarah had chosen to protect Marcus Ashford, but now she wondered if she had the strength and courage to see that choice through to its inevitable conclusion. Sarah drove through the empty city streets with her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The dashboard clock showed 11:47 p.m., and the building where she had spent the last 6 years of her professional life loomed ahead like a fortress in the darkness. She parked in the executive garage and used her key card to access the private elevator that would take her directly to the 42nd floor, bypassing the main security checkpoint in the lobby. As the elevator climbed toward Marcus's executive offices, Sarah tried to prepare herself mentally for what was about to happen. In a few minutes, she would confront the man she had loved and trusted for 8 years, the father of her children, and accuse him of betraying not just their marriage, but also her professional integrity and personal values. There would be no going back from this conversation, no possibility of pretending that their life together could continue unchanged. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that seemed unnaturally loud in the deserted hallway. Sarah stepped out and immediately saw light coming from underneath Marcus's office door. Her stomach clenched with a mixture of fear and determination as she realized that David was already inside, presumably planting the false documents that would destroy an innocent man's reputation. Sarah approached Marcus's office as quietly as possible, hoping to observe David's activities before alerting him to her presence. The door was slightly ajar, and through the narrow opening, she could see her husband sitting at Marcus's massive oak desk, working intently at the computer. He had apparently bypassed the biometric security system, using information he had gathered over years of casual conversations with Sarah about office procedures and protocols. On the desk beside the computer were several manila folders and a stack of documents that Sarah didn't recognize. These were presumably the forged papers that David intended to plant in Marcus's files, carefully crafted to suggest criminal activity and designed to trigger a federal investigation that would destroy everything Marcus had built over decades of honest work. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as David navigated through Marcus's private files with the ease of someone who had clearly studied the system extensively. He knew exactly where to place the false documents for maximum impact, positioning them in folders where they would be discovered quickly, but appear to have been there for months or even years. The level of planning and preparation involved in this betrayal was staggering. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed open the door and stepped into the office. "Hello, David." Her husband spun around in the chair, his face going pale as he saw her standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. David's hands were still on the computer keyboard, frozen in the act of saving a document to Marcus's private server. The false papers were spread across the desk in plain view, making any attempt at denial impossible. "Sarah," David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," Sarah replied, stepping further into the office and closing the door behind her. "But I think we both know why you're here. The question is how long this has been going on." David's mind was clearly racing as he tried to formulate an explanation that might salvage the situation. "This isn't what it looks like," he began. "I can explain everything." "Can you?" Sarah walked closer to the desk, looking down at the forged documents. "Can you explain why you're in my boss's office at midnight, breaking into his private files and planting fake evidence that would send him to prison? Can you explain why you've been selling his business secrets to his competitors for the past 2 years? David's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and, finally, resignation. He had been caught red-handed with no possible excuse or justification for his presence in Marcus's office. The game was over, and he knew it. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since yesterday," Sarah replied. "A woman from Meridian Strategic Solutions came to see me. She showed me photographs of you and Amanda Pierce in a hotel room, surrounded by Marcus's confidential documents. She told me about the scheme to plant false evidence and trigger a federal investigation." David closed his eyes and leaned back in the chair. "Lisa Morrison. I should have known she would develop a conscience at the worst possible moment. So, you admit it? You've been betraying Marcus's trust, stealing his business secrets, and planning to destroy him with false accusations." "Sarah, you have to understand the situation I was in," David said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. 2 years ago, my consulting business was failing. I had lost several major clients, and we were facing serious financial problems. I was desperate to find a way to support our family and maintain the lifestyle we had built together. "So you decided to become a corporate spy?" "I didn't plan it that way. I was approached by someone from Meridian who knew about my financial difficulties. They offered me a substantial amount of money in exchange for information about Marcus Ashford's business operations. At first, I said no. But then Jake needed those expensive allergy treatments, and Emma's school tuition was due, and our mortgage payment was overdue." Sarah stared at her husband with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "You're blaming our children for your criminal activity?" "I'm not blaming them. I'm trying to explain that I did this for our family. Everything I've done has been to protect the life we've built together, to make sure our children have every opportunity and advantage. By destroying the career and reputation of the man who has been nothing but generous to me and our family, Marcus paid for Emma's surgery when her arm was broken. He gave me bonuses that allowed us to buy this house and save for the children's college education. He has treated me like family for 6 years, and you repaid that kindness by stealing from him." David stood up from the chair and moved towards Sarah, his hands extended in a gesture of supplication. "I never meant for you to be involved in this. I try to keep you completely separate from my business arrangements. But I wasn't separate, was I? You've been using me for information for years. Every casual conversation about my work, every question about Marcus's meetings and business plans, every time you offered to help me with a difficult project, you were gathering intelligence to sell to his competitors." "That's not how I saw it," David protested. "I saw it as using the resources available to me to provide for our family's future." "Resources?" Sarah's voice rose with anger. "You mean my trust? My professional reputation? My relationship with Marcus? Those weren't your resources to exploit, David. They were the foundations of everything I've worked to build in my career." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration that Sarah had seen countless times during their marriage. "Sarah, please listen to me. We can still fix this. If you help me finish what I'm doing tonight, we can walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. We can take the children and build a new life away from all of this corporate intrigue and betrayal. You want me to help you frame an innocent man for crimes he didn't commit? Marcus Ashford is not innocent. David said, his voice hardening. He's a ruthless businessman who has destroyed plenty of competitors and smaller companies on his way to building his empire. He's not the benevolent father figure you think he is. Even if that were true, which it isn't, that wouldn't justify what you're doing. You're not exposing actual wrongdoing. You're manufacturing false evidence to destroy someone's life and livelihood. David moved closer to Sarah, and for the first time in their marriage, she felt genuinely afraid of him. His expression had changed from pleading to desperate, and she realized that he was capable of actions she had never imagined. "Sarah, if you don't help me finish this, our entire family will be destroyed. Do you think Meridian Strategic Solutions will just let me walk away from this arrangement? Do you think their clients will accept that I've had a change of heart? I'm in too deep to stop now." "Then, you should have thought about that before you started," Sarah replied, backing toward the door. "I'm not going to help you destroy Marcus, and I'm not going to let you plant those false documents. And what about our children?" David demanded. "What about Emma and Jake? If I'm arrested and prosecuted for corporate espionage, they'll lose their father and their home. You'll lose everything we've built together. Is protecting Marcus Ashford worth destroying our family?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow because it forced her to confront the terrible choice she was making. By stopping David, she would indeed be sacrificing her children's security and happiness. Emma and Jake would grow up knowing that their mother had been responsible for sending their father to prison. They would lose the comfortable suburban life they had always known, and Sarah would have to rebuild everything as a single parent with a tainted professional reputation. But as she looked at the false documents spread across Marcus's desk, Sarah realized that some choices transcended personal considerations. Marcus Ashford had trusted her with his most sensitive business information for 6 years. He had treated her with respect and generosity, supported her career advancement, and never given her any reason to doubt his integrity. She could not stand by and watch him be destroyed by her husband's lies, regardless of the cost to her own family. "I'm sorry, David," Sarah said quietly. "I can't let you do this." She reached for her cell phone to call building security, but David moved quickly to intercept her. He grabbed her wrist and pulled the phone from her hand, his grip tight enough to leave bruises. "I can't let you stop me, Sarah," he said. "There's too much at stake and too many people depending on me to follow through with this plan." For a moment, they stared at each other in silence, and Sarah saw a stranger looking back at her. This was not the gentle, loving man she had married 8 years earlier. This was someone who had been living a carefully constructed lie for so long that he might have forgotten who he really was underneath all the deception. "Let go of me, David," Sarah said firmly. "This ends now." "No," he replied. "This ends when I finish uploading these documents, and Marcus Ashford's reputation is destroyed. After that, we can discuss what happens to our marriage and our family." Sarah realized that she was completely alone with a desperate man who was willing to do whatever it took to complete his mission. The building was empty except for a skeleton crew of security guards 42 floors below, and her cell phone was in David's possession. If she was going to stop him from destroying Marcus Ashford, she would have to find another way. The confrontation that would determine the fate of multiple families was just beginning, and Sarah was no longer sure that she had the strength or resources to emerge victorious from the battle ahead. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, acutely aware that she was trapped in Marcus's office with a man who had revealed himself to be far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. David still held her cell phone, and his grip on her wrist was firm enough to prevent her from moving toward the door. The false documents lay scattered across Marcus's desk like evidence of a crime that would destroy an innocent man's life if Sarah couldn't find a way to stop it. But as she looked into David's eyes, Sarah saw something that gave her hope. Beneath his desperation and determination, she could still see traces of the man she had fallen in love with years earlier. The father who had stayed up all night when Emma had pneumonia, who had taught Jake to ride a bicycle with endless patience, who had once been capable of genuine love and tenderness. That man was still somewhere inside the stranger who was holding her captive in her boss's office. "David," she said softly, "do you remember our wedding day?" His expression flickered with confusion. "What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what you said to me during your vows? You promised to love and honor me, to be honest and faithful, to protect our relationship against anything that might threaten it. Do you remember that?" "Of course I remember," David replied, but his voice was less certain than it had been moments earlier. "Then, you must also remember that I made the same promises to you. I promised to be honest, to be faithful, to protect what we built together. For 8 years, I kept those promises. Even when your work took you away for days at a time, even when you were secretive about your business dealings, even when my instincts told me that something wasn't right, I kept faith with the vows we made to each other." David's grip on her wrist loosened slightly. "Sarah, I never wanted to hurt you. Everything I've done has been to protect our family's future." "No, David. Everything you've done has been to protect yourself. You got involved with corporate espionage because your business was failing, and instead of coming to me for help or support, you chose to lie and steal and betray the people who trusted both of us. You didn't do this for Emma and Jake. You did this because you were too proud to admit that you needed help." "That's not true," David protested, but Sarah could see the uncertainty growing in his eyes. "If you had come to me 2 years ago and told me that your business was in trouble, what would I have done? Would I have left you? Would I have stopped loving you? Would I have refused to help find a solution to our financial problems?" David released her wrist and stepped back, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. The debts were overwhelming, and the bills kept coming, and I couldn't see any way out. So you chose to become a criminal instead of trusting your wife to stand by you during a difficult time. You chose to betray a man who has been nothing but generous to our family instead of finding an honest solution to our problems. And now you're asking me to help you destroy that same man to cover up your crimes." Sarah moved slowly toward the desk where the false documents were spread out. David watched her, but made no move to stop her as she began gathering the papers into a stack. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm destroying these forged documents, and then I'm going to delete whatever files you've uploaded to Marcus's server. This ends now, David. Tonight." "Sarah, you don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. If I don't complete this assignment, Meridian Strategic Solutions will expose everything. They have recordings of our conversations, photographs of me accessing confidential information, evidence of every payment they've made to me over the past 2 years. They'll use all of that to destroy both of us. Then we'll face those consequences together as a family. But I won't let you destroy Marcus Ashford to save yourself." Sarah began tearing the false documents into pieces, systematically destroying each page of fabricated evidence. David watched in horror as months of careful preparation were reduced to scraps of worthless paper. "You're making a terrible mistake," he said. "When this comes out, and it will come out, you'll lose everything. Your job, your reputation, your children's security, all of it will be gone." "Maybe," Sarah replied, continuing to tear apart the documents. "But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. At least I'll know that I chose to protect an innocent man instead of participating in his destruction." David suddenly lunged forward and grabbed Sarah's hands, trying to stop her from destroying the remaining documents. They struggled briefly, papers scattering across the floor, but Sarah was fighting for something more important than her physical safety. She was fighting for her integrity, for her children's ability to respect their mother, for the values that had guided her throughout her adult life. "Please, Sarah," David begged, his voice breaking. "If you destroy those documents, I'm finished. Meridian won't accept failure, and their clients won't tolerate exposure. I'll either end up in prison or dead." "Then you should have thought about that before you started this," Sarah replied firmly. "I'm not going to sacrifice Marcus Ashford to save you from the consequences of your own choices." She broke free from David's grasp and moved to the computer, where she began the process of locating and deleting any files he had uploaded to Marcus's server. The security logs would show exactly what had been accessed, and when providing a complete record of David's unauthorized intrusion into confidential business information. "If you do this, our marriage is over," David said quietly. "Emma and Jake will grow up knowing that their mother chose to protect a stranger instead of their own father." Sarah paused in her work and turned to face her husband. "Our marriage ended the moment you decided to use my love and trust as weapons against my boss and my professional integrity. Emma and Jake will grow up knowing that their mother chose to do the right thing, even when it was difficult and painful. And when they ask why their father is in prison, what will you tell them?" "I'll tell them the truth, that their father made some very bad choices, but that those choices don't define who they are or what they can become. I'll tell them that sometimes protecting innocent people requires personal sacrifice, and that integrity matters more than comfort or security." Sarah completed the process of deleting David's uploaded files and turned off the computer. She then gathered the torn pieces of the false documents and stuffed them into her briefcase, ensuring that no trace of the fabricated evidence remained in Marcus's office. "It's done," she said simply. "Marcus Ashford is safe, and your scheme has failed." David slumped into one of the chairs across from Marcus's desk, looking suddenly older and more fragile than Sarah had ever seen him. The desperate energy that had driven him for the past few hours seemed to have drained away, leaving behind only exhaustion and defeat. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you have to decide who you want to be," Sarah replied. "You can disappear and hope that Meridian Strategic Solutions doesn't find you, or you can turn yourself into the authorities and cooperate with an investigation into their operations. Either way, you can't come home with me. I can't trust you around our children, and I can't pretend that this marriage can continue after what you've done. Sarah, please don't do this. Don't destroy our family over one mistake." "This wasn't one mistake, David. This was 2 years of systematic betrayal, deception, and criminal activity. This was using our children as justification for actions that would have destroyed their ability to respect their father. This was putting my career and reputation at risk without my knowledge or consent. Our family was destroyed the moment you decided to become a corporate spy." Sarah moved toward the door, but David called out to her one final time. "I love you, Sarah. Despite everything that happened, I do love you and the children." Sarah paused with her hand on the doorknob. "I know you do, David, but love without honesty, love without integrity, love that requires the destruction of innocent people, that's not the kind of love that can sustain a marriage or a family. Emma and Jake deserve better than that, and so do I." She left Marcus's office and walked through the empty hallway toward the elevator, knowing that she would never see David again as her husband. The marriage that had defined her adult life was over, ended not by a lack of love, but by the discovery that the man she had loved was not the person she had thought he was. When the elevator doors closed behind her, Sarah allowed herself to cry for the first time since this nightmare had begun. She grieved for the innocent trust that had been shattered, for the children who would grow up without their father, for the secure suburban life that was about to be replaced by uncertainty and struggle. But beneath the grief, she felt something else, a quiet pride in having chosen to protect Marcus Ashford, a sense of integrity preserved despite the enormous cost. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work early and requested a private meeting with Marcus. She told him everything about David's betrayal, about the corporate espionage scheme, about the false documents that had been intended to destroy his reputation. She submitted her resignation, expecting that her association with the conspiracy would make her continued employment impossible. But Marcus Ashford surprised her. Instead of anger or accusations, he expressed gratitude for her loyalty and courage in stopping the scheme. He refused to accept her resignation, pointing out that she had been as much a victim of David's deception as he had been. He arranged for additional security measures to protect the company's confidential information and helped Sarah navigate the legal complexities of divorcing a man who is now a fugitive from federal authorities. 6 months later, David was arrested at an airport in Miami attempting to board a flight to a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. He was charged with corporate espionage, computer fraud, and conspiracy, crimes that would likely result in a decade or more in federal prison. Emma and Jake struggled to understand why their father was gone and why their comfortable suburban life had been replaced by a smaller apartment and tighter financial constraints. But Sarah discovered that her children were more resilient than she had expected. They gradually came to understand that their mother had faced an impossible choice and had chosen to do what was right, even when it was painful. Emma, now 9 years old, told her friends at school that her mother was a hero who had protected innocent people from bad guys. Jake, 7, simply accepted that sometimes life was complicated and difficult, but that didn't mean it wasn't worth living with integrity and hope. Sarah never remarried, choosing instead to focus on raising her children and rebuilding her career. Marcus Ashford remained not just her boss, but a trusted friend who understood the price she had paid to protect him and his company. The experience had taught her that loyalty and love were not the same thing, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to do what is right, even when it destroys everything you thought you wanted to protect. Years later, when Emma and Jake were old enough to fully understand the story of their parents' marriage and its destruction, they would tell Sarah that they were proud of the choice she had made. They understood that their comfortable childhood had been built on a foundation of lies and betrayal, and that their mother's decision to expose the truth had saved them from a life built on dishonesty. Sarah had chosen to protect her billionaire boss, and in doing so, she had discovered that sometimes the most important person you protect is yourself, your integrity, your values, and your ability to live with the choices you make when everything you love is at stake.